Microsoft went full mask off this week with a blatant FU to its employees and gamers everywhere. EA has no interest in making The Sims 5 when they can continue to sell you more than $1,000 worth of The Sims 4, and Battlefield takes a step back, but in a good way. At least that's what we're all hoping. On top of that, we've got a boatload of new releases, reveals, and information about a lot of great games and upcoming projects. Welcome to the channel, I'm Leebs, and let's get into it. Starting things off with nobody's favorite news, more layoffs. That's right, Microsoft is laying off 650 more people, bringing their total to over 2,500 for this year alone. In his letter to employees, gaming boss Phil Spencer has said, "With these changes, our corporate and supporting teams and resources are aligned for future sustainable growth and can better support our studio teams and business units with programs and resources that can scale to meet their needs. Separately, as part of running the business, there are some impacts to other teams as they adapt to shifting priorities and manage the life cycle and performance of games. No games, devices, or experiences are being canceled, and no studios are being closed as part of these adjustments today." However, over at GameFile, Stephen Totilo, after speaking with his sources, reported that there are also cuts involving teams of 2 Activision Blizzard mobile games. Some layoffs are impacting the Warcraft Rumble team, which will continue to be available but is moving from launch to live ops. Others will impact workers on Call of Duty Warzone Mobile, one of 2 Call of Duty mobile titles. That game will also continue, but its team is being scaled down. And next is where congenial and likable gamer dude Phil Spencer rips his mask off to reveal Lizard in a Suit Phil Spencer, because just a few days later, Microsoft announced a $60 billion share buyback program and a 10% dividend increase for investors. I won't bore you with tons of numbers, but the bottom line is that Microsoft is actively spending money to inflate their stock prices while also paying out more money to their investors, while also just saying goodbye 650 employees, we don't need you anymore. And yeah, I know Microsoft has been mask off along with most of the tech industry for a while now, but I do think it's important to acknowledge the brazenness of the move. They had told the FTC this wouldn't happen, among other things, and all of these things have happened. In less than 1 week, Microsoft destroyed the livelihoods of more than 650 people, claiming it was necessary to keep the company sustainable. And then they turned around and gave themselves a pat on the back and some money, and their investors a bit of a payout. Don't kid yourself, that's exactly what happened. Sure, it's not quite as simple as the executives simply putting money into their own pockets, but it's not that far off from what's happened. Unsurprisingly, the Communication Workers of America union released a statement rebuking Microsoft's decision, saying, "While we would hope that a company like Microsoft with $88 billion in profits last year could achieve long-term success without destroying the livelihoods of 650 of our colleagues, heartless layoffs like these have become all too common. We stand in solidarity with everyone who lost their job yesterday and encourage all video game workers to join with us and form unions so we can protect each other." And if you're saying to yourself, wait a minute, didn't Activision Blizzard and Microsoft recently have an influx of unionized workers? Yes, they did, and the reason the CWA couldn't stand up for those 650 employees that just lost their jobs is because they were not part of the union. And if you needed any more proof that unions are necessary in the games industry today, I don't know what else will convince you. Yes, they're a stopgap measure. Yes, they can be corrupted, but come on, at the moment, games industry workers need any kind of help, even if it's imperfect. Unfortunately, InDreams, the VR studio behind Far Cry VR, Synapse, and many other titles, is also letting go of 17.5% of their staff. InDreams' LinkedIn page shows between 200 and 500 employees, so that 17.5 is roughly 30 to 90 people. Likewise, Evening Star, the developers behind Penny's Big Breakaway, have also had to lay off about 6 of their own team members as well, leaving the small studio on rather shaky ground in an already volatile industry. Here's hoping that everyone who has lost their job lands on their feet and can also find access to some better labor protections. We've still got the rest of the year to go. There's 1 more quarter, and we are already at over 12,000 laid off games workers for the year, and it doesn't seem to be letting up. EA, which is always a good segue from Microsoft. EA held an investor day this past week, and while these sorts of events exist solely to excite and pander to investors with lavish promises and long-term goals only loosely connected to reality, we did learn a few interesting tidbits. The presentations boasted the usual back-padding, buzzwords, and other nonsense, with EA desperately trying to assure investors how important AI is to them, even going so far as to say it's the very core of their business, which is just patently incorrect. AI is at the core of OpenAI's business, but last time I checked, EA published video games. Backpatting and lofty goals aside, the presentations did reveal that the third and seemingly final Star Wars Jedi game is in the works to round out Cal Kestis' story. Though it should be noted that Stig Asmussen, the director of the previous two games, is no longer with Respawn, so it remains to be seen what direction this finale will take. We've also got our first new details about the next Battlefield game thanks to an interview with Vince Zampella over at IGN. And Battlefield fans will be happy to hear that the franchise is returning to a more modern-day setting, with Zampella specifically calling out Battlefield 3 and 4 as the peak experiences for the franchise. Even the one bit of concept art we got has a very Battlefield 4 aesthetic to it, or maybe that's just hopium on my part. Speaking of the concept art, an internet sleuth, The Tactical Brit, has already done some homework and thinks they've nailed down the location. If the guess is right, the game, or at least part of it, may be taking place in Gibraltar on the southern coast of Spain. It also appears that ship-to-ship and helicopter combat will feature in the next game, which would especially make sense if the Gibraltar setting is correct. Natural disasters will be returning, but specialists will not, praise the gaming gods. 128-person battles will also not be returning, as Zampella wants the maps to be a bit more dense. So returning to 64-player battles is his solution, and I'm definitely on board with that. We also know that starting sometime early next year, we'll get some large-scale playtesting for the game, which is very promising. I know early betas and early access and all that kind of thing, it takes away from the mystique or the full punch of a full release, but something like Battlefield that you're meant to play for months, if not years on end, I would much rather we bug test the hell out of this one before it gets released. Please and thanks. And lastly, I'm going to hijack Jeff Keighley's tweet where he talks about how the next game will be co-developed by not one, not two, not three, but 4 different studios. Having multiple studios collab on a game isn't anything new, but the split is interesting. DICE will be working on the all-important multiplayer, and Motive will be focused on the single-player experience, while Criterion Games will be left lending support for both single and multiplayer. But then we have Ripple Effect, who are working on some entirely new experience that we don't know much about, or we don't know anything about. And I'm really curious to see if this next Battlefield game really is going to be a return to form, especially with so many cooks in the kitchen. The last bit of big news from EA this week comes from one of their other tentpole franchises, The Sims. And this news is a bit more controversial than the pleasing Battlefield direction. A new blog post lays out the future of the franchise, and that future is more Sims 4 and more Sims games that aren't mainline Sim games, I guess. That seems to be the gist of it. But the devil is in the details, as in this case, more Sims 4 seems to mean purchasable creator kits, akin to Bethesda's paid creator mods. And do I need to say anything more? Basically, no one wanted Bethesda's paid mods, but since when did EA care about what its customers wanted? As for the other Sims content we have looming on the horizon, there's the Life and Death expansion releasing later this fall, along with a couple new kits. Apparently an official Sims movie complete with Simlish and subtitles is coming. And then there's Project Renee, which is an online multiplayer spin-off of The Sim, and it's been in the works for a while. No word on when it's coming out, but it is coming out. I don't know about you guys, but absolutely none of this interests me in the slightest. Paid mods, a movie that's more likely to be awful than it is to be good, and a games-as-a-service version of The Sims, which, let's be honest, Project Renee is the real reason we're not getting Sims 5. It's not enough to have The Sims 4 with literally over $1,000 worth of DLC, no, we need to force the franchise into the live service and bleed it for every ounce of money it can possibly contain, players be damned.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Oh boy. Breaking news, fellow gamers, Nintendo is suing Palworld in a move I think we all expected months ago, but it seems Nintendo needed time to get their ducks, or rather Pokemon, in a row before pursuing this legal action. And yeah, that's basically what they had said months ago when they announced their own investigation. Now it appears Nintendo is ready to send forth their legion of lawyers. The news is still fresh at this time. In fact, I had to stop editing the video and record this last minute. So that's all to say, aside from the legal proceedings being initiated, there's not much else to talk about just yet. I do wonder just what patents Nintendo are claiming have been infringed. I wouldn't be at all surprised if this just turns out to be an intimidation lawsuit, the kind you file just to send a message to any other developers out there daring to mimic Pokemon or any of your other franchises. You can bet I'll be keeping my eyes on this one as it unfolds. Hopefully for next week's video, we'll have a little bit more info to share. Anyway, back to past Leebs. Microsoft and EA being their usual awful selves aside, we got some great new game releases this week, as well as the usual delays to talk about. Final Fantasy XVI is live for PC players now, and the reviews are looking pretty solid. Of course, the game's been out for about a year now on the PS5, and the OpenCritic scores still reflect a mighty rating. I'm sure the reviews will fluctuate as the game settles, but so far the main complaints that I'm seeing are, say it with me, optimization. But even those complaints are relatively quiet compared to the dumpster fires that we're used to. That is one hell of a low bar to hop over these days, isn't it? And somehow tons of studios still trip over the bar as it loosely sits on the floor, just rolling back and forth. Regardless, Final Fantasy XVI is looking to be a solid hit for PC. Unfortunately for PlayStation 5 users, a bit of a hiccup happened after the most recent firmware update, causing some players to have black square artifacts on the screen, crashing when loading saves or fast traveling, and some other oddities. The problem isn't native to Final Fantasy XVI either, as players of other games like Star Wars Outlaws and Death Stranding are also reporting similar issues. Sony hasn't directly addressed the problems, but a tweet from the Final Fantasy XVI account says they're working with Sony to address the issues, so hopefully those get ironed out soon. Oh, also, producer Naoki Yoshida would really like it if the community could not, make all those kinds of mods that always get made. Yeah, you know the ones I'm talking about. Uncle Yoshi P is tired of it and is kindly asking for you to knock it off. I'm sure everyone will come together and obey that request, and Final Fantasy XVI will be the purest of games ever. And while we're talking about Square Enix, everyone has that one friend or family member who, for whatever reason, just cannot be happy. For me, it's my Uncle Fred. Dude could win the lottery and would still find something to be unhappy about. Well, in the games industry, we've got Uncle Square Enix, who hasn't been happy with a game release in 84 years. This time it's Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth that didn't meet sales expectations. Rather than go into it, let's just take a look at these two games. There are two GameSpot articles which, conveniently, have the bestseller snapshots based on the NPD's research data to compare. As of January 19th, 2024, Final Fantasy XVI was ranked 16th in overall sales since its launch in July of 2023, meaning after roughly 6 months of data, it was in the top 20 best-selling games of the year. And then, as of August 21st, 2024, just a couple weeks ago, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was ranked number 9, breaking into the top 10 best-selling games of the year. So remember, when Uncle Square Enix says they're not happy about sales, it's a symptom of dementia and not reality. Roll old man SE over to the window, let him gaze out there for a long time, and maybe his mood will improve a bit. But it probably won't. Moving on, if you're watching this, then God of War Ragnarok is also finally available for the PC as well. This one drops the day this video goes live, so obviously I don't have very reliable reviews to check out just yet, but as long as they don't screw up the optimization or otherwise implement some other boneheaded idea, it should still be fine. Still, as always, check reviews. Oh, also be aware that Ragnarok does require a PSN account on Steam, because yeah, Sony's not going to give up on that one. Frostpunk 2 will also be releasing this Friday, a day after this video goes live. After a delay to polish things up and address some of the feedback from the beta phase, I'm expecting Frostpunk 2 to be a hit, but as always, wait for those reviews. You can check out the game on PC, PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and Game Pass on the 20th of this month. The Plucky Squire from developer All Possible Futures has launched this week to what seems to be a round success. The cute action-adventure game has players moving between 2D and 3D sections of the world to save your friends from a storybook villain. Over on OpenCritic, the game currently has a mighty rating with 88% of critics recommending the title. I'm personally looking forward to trying this one out later, and if you are too, you can pick it up on the PC, PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and the Nintendo Switch. The Souls-like, inspired by Italian folklore and Notria the Last Song, has finally released into the wild, and it's looking to be just okay. Not great, not bad, but alright. The trailers for this game always looked really compelling, and I'm sure a lot of us were hoping for a bit more, but as with so many of these indie or AA Souls-likes, it seems optimization, janky combat and animations, and a lack of quality of life options are some of the sticking points that aren't going over well with some gamers. That said, it does seem to be a decent time if you go in knowing what to expect. You can grab Notria the Last Song for PC and the PS5, and yes, after some confusion and back and forth, it seems it will eventually be coming to Xbox sometime down the road. Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster is looking to be a solid re-release of the 2000s classic, with a strong rating and 77% of critics recommending the game over on OpenCritic. George Foster over at The Gamer gave it 4.5 stars out of 5, saying, "Even if Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster tones down the diamond-sharp edges of the original game a little too much, every single change ultimately works towards making it unarguably the best way to experience Dead Rising, especially for a longtime fan who wants to revisit Willamette in a more approachable game." While IGN Spain's Alejandro Morales gave it a less glowing but still respectable 7 out of 10, saying, "Despite the expected limitations of a game released almost 20 years ago, Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster is the best way to discover the origin of this mythical series." Moving on, we've got Fatal Zone from developer Midhard Games, which has left its early access period this week. A ton of these games have sprung up in the wake of Vampire Survivors, but this one caught my attention thanks to the visuals and the RPG elements. Currently, the game is sitting at 106 very positive reviews over on Steam, with about 1,800 total reviews at mostly positive. If you've already spent some time with the game, let me know what you think down below, because I'm hesitant to pick games like this up because there's so many of them, so you never really know when one's going to be solid or just kind of a dud. Helldivers 2 also released the first of its 60-day improvement plan patches this week, and thankfully it's looking like a winner. In a nutshell, Helldivers 2 has had a nerfing the fun constantly problem, which resulted in over half the game's arsenal not really being usable, and even if it was becoming less and less fun to actually play. This week's patch, however, seems to have finally done the opposite. Thanks to a heavy armor system rework, now many of the game's weapons are actually viable to use and fun to use. I'm not going to go into all the details here as the patch notes are quite extensive, but if you don't care about the nitty-gritty, the takeaway is Helldivers 2 is fun again. For now, until they once again nerf the fun and then promise to fix it again. And if you needed more reason to dive back in, as you've no doubt noticed, I've been playing on the screen here the Chemical Agents Warbond trailer. Here are the unlockables that you can expect from this toxic-themed Warbond, which comes out September 19th. Hopefully the cycle of misery is over now for this game, as it seems fans are returning, for the time being at least. But now that the game is more fun and a bit easier, players are already asking for a higher difficulty setting, and I'm all for it, but let this be a reminder that gamers, like Uncle Square Enix, also can never be happy. It's just impossible. Last week, it was reported that Pocket Pair, the developers behind Palworld, were considering going into the live service black hole. This week, however, the studio was quick to lay player worries to rest. According to the studio, the interview in which those remarks were made is months old, and at the time, they had been already internally discussing the game's business model for the future, but they decided ultimately against going the live service route. In a post over on Twitter, the developers added, "We are still considering skins and DLC for Palworld in the future as a means to support development, but we will discuss with you all again as we get closer to that point. For now, our priority remains making Palworld the best game possible. Only time will tell if this proposed cash shop will remain acceptable, or if it will get sucked into the inescapable gravity that is games as a service." And as is tradition, we've got some delays and cancellations to talk about, as well as a resurrection gone wrong for a classic title. What a Workshop and Private Division have delayed Tales of the Shire from sometime later this year until early 2025. Announced back in 2023, Tales of the Shire is a life sim set in Tolkien's much-loved fantasy world, and a game I sincerely hope is done well. Although the team is taking more time to ensure that outcome, in a few days on the 22nd, which is Hobbit Day in celebration of Bilbo and Frodo's birthdays, we will be treated to a showcase that promises to show off many of the mechanics we're familiar with in these sorts of games, namely fishing, gathering, cooking, and decorating. I'll make sure and post a recap of the events in next week's news video. For now, we'll have to be content with those updates while we wait on the full game to finally come out sometime next year. Paradox and developer Colossal Order are still struggling with City Skylines 2, which has resulted in even more delays. This time it's the Modern Architecture and Urban Promenade creator packs, which are being pushed from 4th quarter 2024 to 2nd quarter 2025. And the Bridges and Ports expansion is likewise being pushed from the 2nd quarter of 2025 to down the road sometime. Paradox is hoping the delays will give the team more time to get the Asset Editor, an important modding feature that still hasn't been added to the game, completely ready to go and integrated. Naturally, Paradox is hoping the extra time ensures that the full launch goes off a fair sight better than the game's launch did last year. City Skylines 2 still hasn't really recovered from the botched release, so maybe these further delays will eventually bring the game up to somewhere it should have always been, but this is Paradox we're talking about, so let's wait and see. Tales of the Shire will eventually be out, and City Skylines 2 may eventually turn into a good game, but Project T from Behavior Interactive definitely isn't happening. This week it was announced the co-op Dead by Daylight shooter spinoff was being put into the grave for good. The closures come after apparent playtests just weren't up to snuff. And while Project T's cancellation got a nice big announcement and graphic, what came next was just swept under the rug. Midwinter Entertainment, the studio behind the project, was unceremoniously and abruptly closed. I know expecting any sort of respect in today's world is basically just asking to be met with derision and self-righteousness, but come on, man. You could at least have given the same paltry respect to the people making the game as you did the game itself. A game that didn't even have a name. It was simply called Project T. But the studio did have a name, as did all the developers. But those folks, what did you give them? Not even a pat on the back, just a boot in the ass. Unacceptable is the most diplomatic word I can possibly use. And while we're on the topic of unacceptable things, Flappy Bird is back, except it's not. Earlier in the week, a random and unexpected flashy trailer for a new Flappy Bird game landed, exciting tons of people. The internet just kind of blew up. The trailer itself insinuates that the original developer has returned for the release, but it was pretty quickly discovered that not only was that not true, the return is actually a flimsy crypto bro NFT scam. Even the original creator of Flappy Bird has spoken up to denounce the re-release, which is particularly poignant since the reason the game's development was stopped was due to the amount of attention, both positive and negative, it was receiving. So now, instead of this poor guy who just wants to live his quiet life, he's once again had to interject himself into the public spotlight. But how exactly did we get to this point? Well, the long and short of it is that a group called Game Tech Holdings LLC submitted a claim that the Flappy Bird trademark had been abandoned. After the game's creator failed to dispute the claim, it ended up in the hands of the Flappy Bird Foundation, which was founded in 2023. However, it quickly became known that Michael Roberts was involved with Flappy Bird's re-release. Mr. Roberts is the founder of 1208 Productions, which is a mobile game developer that has heavy ties to NFTs, including an NFT brand named D's, because of course it is. The plot thickened when cybersecurity specialist Varun Biniwal, I don't know how to pronounce that, I'm sorry if I butchered it, but they did their own research and found early builds of the game contained crypto and NFTs. So that's that. Flappy Bird is still set to be re-released sometime next year, but fans of the game, don't be fooled, this is not what you wanted. Not only do I actively not want this next story, but it legitimately bummed me out this last weekend. Last week's news went live a bit before this happened, but I did want to circle back and touch on it. Annapurna has suddenly gone from hitmaker to an empty office. That's a sentence from Game Developer in their article discussing the collapse of Annapurna, the well-known publisher of games like Outer Wilds and Stray. After the company failed in a negotiation to take the publisher indie, all 25 staff, including leadership, walked out the front door. And just like that, the publishing arm of Annapurna disappeared. Well, that's not entirely accurate. Hector Sanchez, newly returned to the company he helped found, is remaining, but he's literally all that's left. Annapurna Pictures founder Megan Ellison was quick to do damage control and assure the public that the publishing branch would be rebuilt rather than closed, but that remains to be seen. Not a lot is known about the details leading to this dramatic exit, but Jason Schreier over at Bloomberg has said that after Ellison pulled out of the talks, the entire company pulled out of the company. So it doesn't take rocket science to see that there's some pretty bad blood going on there. Despite Megan Ellison's reassurances, no one really knows for sure what's going to happen to the host of games set to be published by Annapurna in the coming months, nor how this will impact Annapurna's in-house studio and support teams. A handful of studios, including those behind Wonderstop, The Lost Wilds, and a couple others, have come forward to state that their games will be unaffected. Likewise, Control 2 and Remedy seem to be alright, but until we know more, it's hard to say what's PR speak and what's reality. Earlier this year, Saber Interactive was sold to the newly formed Beacon Interactive for $247 million. The deal also came with an option for Beacon to buy 4A Games, the makers of Metro, along with Zen Studios, mostly known for pinball. I think most of us were hoping that at minimum 4A Games would escape the clutches of Embracer, but now we've learned the option has been declined, and both 4A Games and Zen Studios will be staying with Embracer. I've also got a quick update on last week's news that Mint Rocket, the developers behind Dave the Diver, were going to split off from Nexon and go indie. Well, it turns out the initial reporting jumped the gun a bit. I was quite happy when I read all about the story, as Dave the Diver was a really fun game and I'd love to see what Mint Rocket can do if they're not under the yoke of Nexon, but that's not really what's happening here. Rather than full-on going indie, Nexon is establishing Mint Rocket as its own corporation, which will obviously be a subsidiary of Nexon. So we'll have to wait and see what practical changes this brings us, if any, as gamers, but oh well. Moving on, let's switch gears and take a look at some reveals and some leaks that happened this week. In what is sadly becoming so common that it's expected these days, Nintendo is currently scrambling to remove leaked footage and copies of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom from the internet. Not much else to add to this one, it's leaked and in the wild, so spoiler avoiders, be on your guard for the next week or two. Zelda Echoes of Wisdom is due to officially release on the 26th, so there's still plenty of time for the internet to ruin something else for you. Black Myth Wukong developer Game Science seems like it might be aiming to release a DLC sometime in the first quarter of 2025, at least according to games industry journalist and consultant Daniel Camillo. According to Camillo's sources, he's expecting the release to roughly line up with the Chinese New Year, so something near the end of January or beginning of February. No information about the content we can expect, nor is an expansion officially revealed, so take all this for what it is until we know more. The third installment of the popular My Time series from Pathia Games has been revealed, complete with its customary Kickstarter. My Time at Portia and My Time at Sandrock are some of my favorite games in the genre, so I'm more than a little excited at having another one to play, especially since this one is changing the formula up a bit, and that callback to My Time at Portia at the end of there was just perfect. This is what Pathia have to say about the next game. In My Time at Portia and My Time at Sandrock, players embraced the role of the builder, tasked with completing essential jobs to keep the town running, often taking on work others avoided. My Time at Evershine, however, introduces a fresh dynamic, transforming the player's role and elevating you from builder to governor. As the city's key figure, you'll start with nothing more than a modest campfire, but your vision and leadership will drive the development of the entire city and its citizens. With other characters handling the smaller routine tasks, your role as governor feels more relaxed, giving you the freedom to focus on shaping the city's future and dive into the dangers that await. If you're interested in supporting the game's development, the Kickstarter launches September 24th, otherwise expect this one to spend a year or two in the oven before we get to partake. Sportal, from developers Sleepwalking Potatoes, that's a great name, is a retro FPS where you can use sporting equipment, baseball bats, hockey sticks, golf clubs, bowling balls, and pigskins to launch projectiles into monsters straight from the classic creature features. Collect upgrades, find gear, and hit fastballs to get back home in this stylish action game set in 50s America. And that was taken straight from the Steam page. I'm not sure what to make of this one just yet, but the premise is odd and interesting. We'll see how this one plays out next year when it launches. Decadent is a story-based first-person shooter with some nice Lovecraftian vibes from developer Incantation Games. From the Steam page, you are John Lorne, a royal explorer and a veteran of the Great War turned decadent occultist. As a result of a traumatic experience during one of your occult experiments, you became a host for a mysterious parasite. Traveling to the Arctic one last time, you follow the traces of a lost Miskatonic University expedition. As your courage and sanity are pushed to the limits, you must learn to walk the line between good and evil and discover just how much grief and suffering you are ready to cause to save someone you hold dear. No release information just yet, but I'm always down for some cosmic horror, so I'll let you know more when I know more. And GTA 5, after 9 years, has suddenly decided to add BattlEye anti-cheat to the game. Considering the amount of cheaters in GTA Online, that probably sounds like a good thing for many gamers, until you realize that for some inexplicable reason, Rockstar is refusing to turn on the compatibility layer for Proton, the OS that Steam Deck uses. Yep, for some reason or other, Rockstar has actively decided to make GTA Online unplayable for the Steam Deck. And I say actively decided on purpose, because Proton and BattlEye are very compatible. All Rockstar has to do is put in the effort to reach out to Proton or Steam. You can disable BattlEye with the launch argument, and the single-player mode of GTA 5 seems to still be fine, but it's utterly baffling why Rockstar is refusing to make online playable for Proton. If it was an issue of money for whatever reason, or some other technical issue, all it would take is a quick tweet to say, oh hey, yeah, we know, we're working on it, sorry about that. Instead, their actions are speaking for them, and their actions say, we don't care. And in some related news, a Red Dead Redemption remaster has once again shown up, this time on Steam. A couple weeks ago, a listing for the remaster appeared on the PlayStation Store before vanishing, and now that it's in Steam's database, it seems only a matter of time before the official reveal, maybe sometime at PAX West in the next couple days, we'll see. I've also got some news from our friends over in the EU and Australia this week, starting with a fake retro gaming operation being squashed by the Italian authorities. Around 12,000 consoles and 47 million pirated games, totaling over 55 million USD, were seized and destroyed, with the bulk of the fake merchandise being 1980s and 90s retro games. According to Alessandro Langella, the head of the Economic Crime Unit for Turin's Financial Police, all of the counterfeit goods were Chinese in origin and utilized uncertified batteries and circuitry, posing a potential hazard to users. If the 9 Italian nationalists now in custody are found guilty, they will face up to 8 years in prison. In some broader EU news, the European Consumer Organization has filed a complaint with the European Commission regarding the use of premium in-game currencies, claiming that they're used to trick players into overspending. And yeah, I mean, that's literally the entire reason they exist. There is absolutely no reason your favorite skin in insert whatever game should cost 1,000 scam points when they could just charge you the actual cost in your local currency. There's no other reason for that. Now the complaint has been filed, the European Consumer Organization is hoping to get the ball rolling on better enforcement and regulation of premium currencies. More on this story as it unfolds in the coming weeks. Our friends down under are also getting in on their regulatory actions with a particular focus on in-game gambling rules and casino-style minigames. Of course, the risk with regulation is always over-regulation, and these new Australian rules, I don't know, man. If your game has any sort of simulated gambling, your game will be restricted to 18 plus for that alone. And that alone, that's it. So Blackjack in the original Red Dead, Fallout New Vegas, Pokemon Red and Blue's Casino, yeah, all of that would be treated equally under this new rule. So a tad on the over-regulated side, don't you think there, Australia? In any case, the changes go into effect this September 22nd. Now, these changes aren't going to be retroactive to games that are already out, but if for whatever reason your game becomes unclassified for whatever reason, remasters, remakes, etc., then they will be subject to these new changes. And lastly, just a quick check-in with the SAG-AFTRA strike that's been going on for closing in on 2 months now. The day this video goes live, the SAG-AFTRA members will be picketing Disney, continuing their protest for fair and equitable AI rules, among many other considerations. As of now, not much has happened with the strike, but we mostly knew this was going to be a slow boil. Until the big companies start to feel the burn in their wallets, they're going to delay any action, and unfortunately that means a lengthy strike unless something changes. Here's to those out there fighting the good fight. Hey there, if you made it to the end, you're a trooper. Thanks so much for hanging out. I hope you've had a good week so far. Mine's been all right. What are you going to be playing this weekend? I'm still working my way through Final Fantasy XIV's gargantuan story, so that's where my free time is going to be going. But as always, I'll be back with more news next Thursday morning, so I hope to see you back here if you've got the time. Otherwise, have a great weekend and stay safe out there.